totalitarian regime that controls everything. They have no profit motive, right? They control the balance sheet and profit statement of every firm. No one knows that.
One of the things that China was extremely strict on us about was if you're going to have access to this market and you're going to have access to market and promote this movie far beyond most movies, you need to shoot the movie here.
But the take is on. We do have an option. Take away Chinese banks' ability to settle their transactions worldwide in US dollar.
Welcome to NTD Evening News. Tonight, Europe and Saudi Arabia are making headlines. President Biden closing out his trip to France by paying respects to American soldiers who died in 2 world wars. What's Biden's message to Americans amid ongoing conflicts in the world? Iris Tao in France. It looks like the U.S. could be closer to strengthening ties with Saudi Arabia. Reports indicate a treaty is nearly finalized. This could have far-reaching implications for Israel and the rest of the Arab world. Jack Bradley reports. The UN Council approves a ceasefire plan for Gaza for the first time. More on the plan drafted by the U.S. And Israel rescues 4 hostages in the Gaza Strip over the weekend. But Hamas media claims hundreds of people died during the operation. Jason Perry has the war update. The Hunter Biden jury begins deliberating. The 6-day trial concluded after closing arguments this afternoon, with the president's son not taking the stand. Arlene Richards has the highlights of a busy court day. And insurance companies could be tracking how you drive via smartphone apps. That includes how hard you brake when you drive, your speed, and more. Find out how it works.
Already built into the car.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Biden wraps up his trip to France by paying respects to American veterans, while calling on Americans to not forget the power of allies. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us more from Paris.
And President Biden on Sunday wrapped up his 5-day trip to France by visiting the final resting place of more than 2,000 U.S. soldiers who died fighting in World War I. Biden, paying his respect, said he wanted to remind Americans of the importance of allies.
Acknowledge that the best way to avoid these kinds of battles in the future is to stay strong with our allies. Do not break. Do not break.
Over the weekend, Biden also met with French President Emmanuel Macron, after which he stressed the need to keep NATO strong and vowed to continue supporting Ukraine.
Because we know what happens if Putin succeeds in subjugating Ukraine. And we won't stop it. Putin's not going to stop in Ukraine.
In the several speeches he gave in France, Biden avoided mentioning the name of his 2024 rival, former President Trump. He even declined to answer a question about Trump on Sunday. But his 2024 message was clear throughout this trip. He's seeking to contrast his foreign policy with Trump's by drawing from history to highlight his view that America needs to stand with allies and avoid becoming what he called semi-isolationists. That can also be seen when Biden in Paris last week apologized to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky for the delay in sending U.S. aid, on which he further commented on Sunday.
It's not who we are. It's not who America is.
Meanwhile, Biden, who's back in D.C. for a few days, will soon head back to Europe, this time to Italy for the G7 summit this week. He'll talk with G7 leaders about how to further support Ukraine and to strengthen U.S. alliances on the world stage, a key theme to his 2024 campaign. He'll also again meet with Zelensky in Italy just a few days after sitting down with him right here in Paris. Reporting in Paris, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Europe just took a big step to the right in recent elections. In France, President Emmanuel Macron's party suffered a major defeat, prompting him to call for a snap election. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pasdar has the roundup.
French President Emmanuel Macron has dissolved the country's parliament and called for an election. His party is set for a heavy defeat at the hands of Marine Le Pen's National Rally. Exit polls showed National Rally with more than double the share of votes as the ruling party.
For me, who has always considered Europe to be united, strong, independent, and good for France, this is a situation that I cannot come to terms with.
Le Pen spoke on the results on Monday, saying she's open to work with other parties.
I think we have an historic chance to allow the national movement to put France back on track. And for this, we must be able to bring together to open up to all men and women of goodwill who are patriots.
In Germany, the ruling Social Democrats and the Green Party suffered a major blow, according to the exit polls. The Alternative for Germany party came in second. That's as more Germans expressed long-held concerns about the country's immigration policies.
The votes for right-wing populist parties here and in other European countries must worry us. We must never get used to this, and it must always be our mission to push them back and to ensure that there are clear majorities in favor of parties that have made a clear commitment to our democracy, to the rule of law, to what still defines us as a European Union, and that they also represent this.
In Italy, Premier Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy doubled their seats in the European Parliament. The party advocates for strong national sovereignty, traditional family values, and a tough stance on immigration. In Hungary, right-leaning Prime Minister Viktor Orban's party came out on top, but with a lower vote share than before. Political newcomer Peter Magyar, who broke from Orban's party earlier this year, led his new party to second place. Magyar is promising to root out corruption and revive democratic checks and balances. Ariane Pasdar, NTD News.
The United Nations Security Council just backed a U.S. ceasefire proposal for the Israel-Hamas war. The plan was outlined by President Biden, and it sets out conditions for a hostage and prisoner swap. The plan was finalized after 6 days of negotiations within the council. A resolution needs at least 9 votes in favor and no vetoes by the U.S., France, Britain, China, or Russia to pass. Among the members, China did not block the proposal and Russia abstained. This marks the bloc's first time to agree to a ceasefire plan. And in Israel, Minister Benny Gantz quit the country's 3-man war cabinet yesterday. He's from a different party as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and allegedly joined the war cabinet as a show of unity against Hamas. Gantz is calling on Netanyahu to agree to an election date. Over the weekend, Israel rescued 4 hostages in the Gaza Strip, but the Hamas-run health ministry said hundreds of people died during the rescue operation. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest and a warning. This report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
On Saturday, Israel conducted a hostage rescue mission in the central Gaza Strip in the middle of the day. In a joint operation, the IDF, the Israel Security Agency, and the Israeli police rescued 4 hostages. This video, released by the Israeli Police and Security Service, shows 3 of the hostages being rescued, followed by heavy gunfire as they tried to make their way to safety. And once they got on the helicopter, an Israeli troop asked them if it was their first time on a helicopter, and then explained to them where they were going to land in Israel. The other hostage, Noah Argarmani, was rescued in the same mission, but from a different location. She's seen in this video from October 7th being driven away on the back of this motorcycle, while her boyfriend, who's still in captivity, was being escorted by terrorists. And after 8 months of captivity, the former hostages reunited with their loved ones.
I want to thank the qualified, humane, and most moral army in the world. There's no such army in the world.
And the IDF called out Al Jazeera because reportedly one of their journalists, Abdullah Al-Jamal, was holding 3 of the hostages. The Hamas media reported that 274 people were killed in the hostage rescue operation, although this number is not independently verified. They also said that 3 hostages were killed in the operation, but the IDF called that a blatant lie. A resident in the Gaza Strip recalled what happened on that day.
This is our house. We were safely sitting in it, and suddenly, several consecutive explosions happened. We did not know what was happening. There are still children under this building. We don't know how to pull them out.
Meanwhile, on Monday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with officials in Egypt and in Israel as he tries to push forward a ceasefire deal to release the remaining 120 hostages held in the Gaza Strip. Blinken said Israel has agreed to the latest ceasefire deal, and they are waiting on Hamas to accept it. Jason Berry, NTD News.
The U.S. is reportedly close to finalizing a treaty with Saudi Arabia. This could have far-reaching implications for Israel. It could also help keep the Chinese regime's influence out of the region. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley brings us this report.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that this treaty, known as the Strategic Alliance Agreement, is nearly finalized, and that this would mean the U.S. would come to Saudi Arabia's aid if it were ever attacked. It would also likely open up ties between the country and Israel. This treaty is modeled after the U.S. security relationship with Japan. It would grant Washington access to Saudi territory and airspace to protect U.S. allies. It would also prohibit the Chinese regime from building military bases in the region or forming security ties. Saudi Arabia and Iran are competing for regional supremacy. In 2019, Iran-backed Houthi rebels attacked oil fields in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest exporter of oil, so the attack disrupted the global oil market. The treaty could risk increasing tensions with Iran, but it would bolster the country's security alliance with the U.S. The agreement would make Saudi Arabia the only Arab state with a formal U.S. defense treaty. Although it's not conditional, the Saudis want to see an end to the war in Gaza and a plan for a Palestinian state. And right now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the Middle East calling on leaders to press Hamas for a ceasefire deal.
If you want a ceasefire, press Hamas to say yes. If you want to alleviate the terrible suffering of Palestinians in Gaza, press Hamas to say yes. If you want to get all the hostages home, press Hamas to say yes.
This comes after Israeli forces over the weekend rescued 4 hostages that were held by Hamas since October. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry had recorded 270 Palestinians that were killed in the operation, according to the Hamas terrorist figures. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Congress will review its 2025 defense appropriations bill this week. The House and Senate have different priorities, with House Republicans looking to cut costs and GOP senators hoping to increase it. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details.
The House Rules Committee will review this Tuesday the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2025. House appropriators have allocated $833 billion to fund the Department of Defense for the coming year. That's 1% higher than last year and in keeping with the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2024. The House's defense bill cuts $18 billion from the president's budget request and redirects most of those funds to efforts to counter China, drug trafficking, and funding a 4.5% pay rise for all military personnel and a 15% pay boost for junior enlisted service members. It's expected that Speaker of the House Mike Johnson will put the House's version of the defense bill to a vote on the House floor this week. Also this week, behind closed doors, the Senate's Armed Services Committee will mark up its version of the defense bill. Republican Senator Roger Wick from Mississippi has already introduced an amendment to increase defense spending by $55 billion.
I recently introduced a detailed plan to rebuild American military might and restore our ability to deter threats. It would be a down payment for our future, and it would be expensive. Many worthwhile things are expensive, but it would be far less costly than war.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has endorsed the amendment, which also calls to increase military spending from 2.9% of GDP to 5% over time. Senate Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Senator Patty Murray from Washington has already said that any defense increase should be matched with similar non-defense spending increases. It's important to note that according to the Congressional Budget Office, the U.S. government will pay more than $950 billion to service its foreign debt in 2025. That's $100 billion more than projected defense spending. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The Hunter Biden jury began deliberations today as attorneys completed closing arguments in a busy Delaware court. The president's son faces possible jail time if he's convicted of felony gun charges. He chose not to take the stand. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more details.
In a Delaware courtroom Monday, where several of Hunter Biden's family members filled the first row of seats, prosecutor Leo Wise cautioned the jury to not be distracted. All of this is not evidence, Wise said while gesturing around the courtroom. People sitting in the gallery are not evidence. No one is above the law, he said. Wise recapped the 6-day trial by highlighting what he called ugly and overwhelming evidence. The president's son is charged with 3 felonies stemming from the October 2018 purchase of a gun that he had for about 11 days. Prosecutors say he lied on a mandatory gun purchase form by saying he was not illegally using or addicted to drugs. If he is found guilty, the president's son could face up to 25 years behind bars. He has pleaded not guilty. President Biden confirmed in a recent ABC interview that he will not pardon his son.
But let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
Wise said the evidence shows the younger Biden knew he was a user of or addicted to crack cocaine when he answered no to the question. He re-showed the jury text message exchanges Hunter had with his brother's widow, Hallie Biden, in October 2018. Wise said the messages show Hunter was buying drugs in October. The prosecution also highlighted Hunter's own words about his addiction written in his 2021 memoir. The defense rested its case without calling Hunter to the stand. During closing arguments, Hunter's attorney, Abby Lowell, focused on the word knowingly, saying Hunter's state of mind at the time of the gun purchase is critical. He also tried to undercut testimony from the former girlfriends, arguing that Hunter had a habit of lying to Hallie about his whereabouts. Poor Hallie Biden, he said. He told the jury that Hunter's memoir was not a diary entry, but rather a look back at his journey. He defended how Hunter handled the gun, arguing that he kept it in his truck unloaded and in a lockbox. Lowell accused Hallie of using a code she knew to open the box. The attorneys completed closing arguments before the court adjourned for the day. The jury began deliberations around 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Former President Trump attended a virtual meeting with a New York City probation officer today. The probation interview is a standard procedure in most criminal court systems and required as part of the pre-sentencing report. Normally, the meetings are held in person, but Trump was permitted to stay in his Florida home with his attorney by his side. The interview is part of a pre-sentencing report that Judge Juan Merchan will use as a guide for his sentencing decision. A jury found the former president guilty of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in a historic criminal case. He faces up to 4 years in prison or probation. Judge Merchan has scheduled the sentencing hearing for July 11th. Coming up, how could work permits for immigrants impact local businesses? And how should America move forward on the border? The founder and CEO of the U.S. Hispanic Business Council joins us to discuss the border crisis and the path to solutions. And your driving habits may be under surveillance. How smartphone apps can provide data to insurance companies when we return.
In manufacturing, transportation, and hospitality. And these are the industries that have now been suffering for some time in terms of work shortages. They don't have enough employees. So I happen to believe, our association believes, that work permits done legally, done in an orderly fashion, are good for the American people and are good for the American economy.
To your point, many have said that America was built by immigrants, and we have Illinois State Representative Lisa Hernandez saying, quote, "The time for executive action is now." You also have a group of pro-immigrant organizations saying that more than 400,000 immigrants have worked for decades without work permits across Illinois, but that they've been paying taxes and all of that. Given that, how should America handle illegal immigration? Work permits seem like maybe a temporary solution. How should we deal with this?
You know, I think work permits are a part of the solution. They are by no means the comprehensive solution that is required. The fact of the matter is, you know, under this administration, and I'm a Democrat, as you well know, Tiffany, but under this administration, we have had more than 7 million people enter through our southern border illegally. And that is equivalent to all of the Americans living in the states of Delaware, Vermont, Rhode Island, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Alaska combined. So think about that. The fact of the matter is there's a crisis on the border. That needs to be priority number one. We need to figure out how we're going to solve the current crisis. Right now, we have over 4 million people in the process waiting for asylum. To get through that backlog of 4 million people, it will take our system more than 7 years. That's just to handle the backlog that we're dealing with. So clearly, we have to be, you know, open-minded and clear-eyed about the situation at the border. It is a crisis. It needs to be handled. We can do it. Above and beyond that, on a going forward basis, the American economy, frankly, relies on immigrant labor. And to your point, America was built by immigrants. And so I think there is a place here for business and the commercial interests of our nation and our elected officials to come together with a comprehensive solution, again, that will benefit the American people and benefit the American economy.
To your point, polls show that immigration is a top concern for voters, given this is an election year. Now, this is an issue that both sides have seized on. What do you think is being left out of the conversation when it comes to this?
I'm glad you asked, Tiffany, because, you know, I'm waiting for the presidential debates. I've been hearing a lot of the rhetoric back and forth, but all too often they leave out the missing piece, which is the fact that we have to have a comprehensive solution and one that considers the commercial and economic interests of our nation and that allows our industries, again, like hospitality, construction, manufacturing, and agriculture, to hire the needed labor they need. At this juncture, if we continue as we are going with these kind of less than 100% employment in those industries, prices will continue to go up. Eventually, we're going to see shortages of some products. And so that can be alleviated by having the right system in place. I'd like to see on both sides of the aisle,
Keep it good ones, get ready to bed.
instead of fear-mongering or politicizing this issue, looking at it as adults and frankly coming clean with the American people and saying, listen, there's a place for a steady flow of immigrants to keep our economy going, but at the same time, we need to keep, you know, national security and the safety of our American citizens, you know, front and center. There is a way to do it. We are America. We can handle this, but we have to put the political issues aside and start working together as Americans to solve this problem.
Like you said, it's the United States of America. Javier Palomares, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tiffany. Appreciate it.
Insurance companies could be tracking how you drive via smartphone apps. That includes how hard you brake when you drive, your speed, and more. Here's the story.
Your driving habits may be under surveillance. Some apps, such as weather app MyRadar, parenting app Life360, and Gas Buddy, let users opt in to features that can collect very specific driving information and send that information to insurance companies. Gas Buddy says its features are meant to improve fuel efficiency. Only if you hit the privacy policy at the bottom of this screen and go through these waves of text do you see what information it collects, and the fact it sends insurance companies this data.
The speed at which you brake, total number of miles driven, times of day driven. They haven't really gone too heavy into average speeds yet, but that will be something that will be coming very soon. The other thing that they do a lot of detection on is phone usage while driving.
Ezra Peterson is a director at Way.com, a car super app that doesn't collect driving data without expressed consumer consent. He says unsafe drivers should be concerned about rate increases.
Drivers that are typically poor behaving drivers that have somehow evaded the normal triggers that would cause rate increases.
Meanwhile, good drivers can benefit from being tracked. Some insurers offer tracking services, which drivers willingly opt into.
It's possible to save up to 30 to 40% versus standard auto insurance rates, but that just depends on, number one, your driving habits, and number two, what your individual insurer offers.
Insurance expert Mark Friedlander says drivers who use these services are saving money and driving more safely because they know what data is being tracked.
Coming up, a Middle East affairs analyst joins us to discuss the latest developments in the region, what he says about the ceasefire proposal in the Israel-Hamas war, and a potential treaty with Saudi Arabia. And you're